Um, then I'll introduce Ambassador Garcia-Peña. He's a historian, academic, and journalist, and his career has centered on peace building, international relations, and journalism. He holds a master's degree in Latin American political studies from the National University of Colombia and a bachelor's degree in political science and history from Belmont Abbey College in the U.S. Throughout his career, he has held numerous positions. He served as a High Commissioner for Peace from 1995 to 1998, and he was also the Consul General of Colombia in Paris from 2012 to 2015. In addition to his diplomatic roles, he has been professor at the National University of Colombia, where he specialized in U.S. history and foreign policy. Great fit for this posting. And he was invited to teach at the American University in D.C., where he gave a postgraduate course on war and peace in Colombia between 1999 and 2000. He has been a columnist for El Espectador and earned the Simón Bolívar Journalism Award for Best Column. That's our highest award that is given to journalists in Colombia. So we will start with a presentation by the ambassador. He'll talk for around 15, 20 minutes. I will ask a couple of questions after that, and then we hope to give a lot of opportunity to students to ask questions. It's a great privilege to have you here. I think Colombia has a very diverse and multifaceted agenda with the U.S., so it will be great to hear what you're doing at the embassy. Thank you, Ambassador, for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. It's really a great pleasure to be here. This is for me, the most pleasurable moments to be able to. We have a lot of hard work we do in the embassy, a lot of tough meetings, but coming to this university and being able to speak to a group of students is where I sort of feel like I feel more comfortable. And at this university, I hold it very dear. There's an old friend, Mark Chernick, many years headed the Latin American program, and actually I was invited to give his talks at his classes and in Bogotá and Los Andes. He had some courses I would always share with the students. So it's great to be here and to be able to share with you. And basically what I want to talk a little bit about how the relationship between Colombia and the U.S. has been built over the years. And I have the fortune, a lot of people say I have a hard job. It probably is a challenging job, but it's also a great privilege because Colombia and the U.S. have built, I like the word partnership more than relationship over the years. This year will be 203 years of relationship between our two countries, and especially in the last decades, Colombia and the U.S. have been able to identify what our national objectives are as a nation and what the U.S.'s national objectives are, and to build upon them in different moments of our history, the understanding that we need to work together on those specific areas where we have shared interests. A few years ago, it was the issue of drugs and security in Plan Colombia. In 2016, with the peace accord, it was the agreement between the government and the FARC, in which the U.S. played a vital role, and to this day is a prime donor of our implementation of our peace accord. When President Petro came in and Biden met back in April of 2023, new issues appeared, climate change, now issues of migration. Over the years, commerce and trade. And so it's a diverse agenda that has multifaceted, that has built, also has understood how important it is to understand that we are two countries that are democracies. There are changes in government in the U.S., there are changes in government in Colombia. Plan Colombia was negotiated by President Clinton, a Democrat, and it was President Bush that came in, and after that it was Obama, and then we had Trump and Biden, and back and forth, and Colombia as well. The changes between Uribe and Santos that you got to live, they were very, very best friends at first, and then not so much at the end. And then we had Duque, and then we had Petro. So changes there, changes here. And over the years, the relationship has not only maintained, but it has broadened, has been enriched, and has developed. And I'm very honored to serve in a position where there have been very high quality ambassadors before me that have left a very high Mark, and the team, as you mentioned, understaffed and overcommitted. I love that. It's true. I'd say it's one of the best teams that we have in any embassy in the world that is recognized. See here, Kevin can maybe attest to that. Of folks that have worked with the people in the embassy. So it's an interesting moment, but obviously we are at a different moment. With the election of President Trump, obviously we're at a very different from what we were when I first arrived. But from the very beginning, when President Petro called me to be the ambassador, talking about back in middle of last year, way before we didn't know what was going to happen, the first thing he said to me, he goes, Daniel, everything that we need to do in Colombia, everything that I was elected to do in Colombia, we need the United States. And I thought that was just a very interesting way of understanding, which is not, it should not be a given. You know, the President Petro is the first leftist president, democratically elected in Colombia. He served, or he was part of a long history in which he was a guerrilla back in the 80s, part of the peace process in the 90s. And in fact, when I first met then Gustavo Petro before he was president, he said to me, look, the U.S. is the imperialist, and as a good leftist, I hate the U.S. And I go, the U.S. is not that bad. The U.S. that's where the civil rights movement started, the labor movement, the women's movement, the gay liberation movement. And Petro has always understood, in part of the conversation I had with him that day before coming, of how the diversity of the United States, how that wealth of the United States, and how that historic relationship between our two countries not only should continue, but should be furthered, obviously in our interest, and to further those issues that we need to deal with. And we prepared. We prepared. What happens if Kamala Harris wins? What happens if Donald Trump wins? The day that Trump won, the next day, had a long conversation, about 2.5 hours, with President Petro about this, and we agreed on. In fact, he said it on the Twitter. First of all, we recognize that the American people spoke and elected Donald Trump. Like him, don't like him, whatever you want. It was a mandate of the U.S. American people. He was elected, and a lot of people are upset about what he does and what he doesn't do. Trump is doing what he said he was going to do, so there should be no surprises. And we in Colombia understand that although there are differences, there will always be differences. It's hard to imagine two presidents that are further apart on the ideological spectrum than Petro and Trump. Climate change, for example. I mean, we're never going to convince Trump to stop the baby drill, nor we're going to convince President Petro that climate change is a hoax. And on many other issues, we will continue to have great differences between the two. But our job, my job, and my orders from my president is find those areas, those specific aspects in which we can work with the Trump administration, in which that historic partnership can not only continue but be furthered. And that is what we are dedicated to doing today and during these last months and for the coming months to come. We had a first little crisis, test, if you want. Maybe some of you saw that we were in the news. January 26th, 6 days after the inauguration, Colombia all of a sudden appeared. That had to do with a very specific issue, the decision on the part of the Trump administration to mass deportations. We always said, as those Colombians that are in this country irregularly, as we call them, in the U.S. they call them illegals. If they broke the law, or if they are according to the law, they have to be deported. We are welcome to. We are obliged to receive them back home, but, and that was with a big but, in conditions of dignity and integrity. And the fact is that the way the mass deportation were done was just simply not the case, you know. And to say that they're all criminals, and they're not criminals. Of the deportees that came back to Colombia, not a single one had a crime against them. They were people that simply came to seek a better future. That crossed the border illegally, yes, but that do not deserve to be handcuffed or put these things on their feet in these horrible situations in which they were treated. So President Petro decided to send back 2 flights, as you may have saw, at 3 a.m. in the morning. I would have preferred he do it at some other time. But the fact is that generated a huge crisis. Immediately, Trump on social media said that they were going to do sanctions and all these kinds of things on Colombia. But that day, 26th of January, for me was very important for several reasons. It showed, for one thing, how, despite the differences, we were able to find a diplomatic solution. From the very beginning, we began speaking with Mauricio Claver Caroni, who was designated by President Trump to deal with this. And from the very beginning, we were able to go back and forth, let's solve this. Secondly, in Colombia, maybe I should have said this first, because for me it was the most important. In Colombia, there was unanimous support for saving the U.S. relationship. Despite the differences in Colombia between Uribistas and Petristas and left and right, everybody came together. We spoke to the ex-presidents from all the different areas, and they all supported, and they all sent their messages to their friends in Washington, because they all have friends in Washington. And that was very, very important. And here too, in the U.S., many people that you would not think about. I'm always mentioning because it's for me one of those crazy things that you have happen in this city that I've come to become actually very close to is a senator from Alabama, Coach Tuberville, Tommy Tuberville. Yeah, you guys laughing because we talk about football, American football. That's what we talk about. He's the one that went to the Super Bowl with President Trump. And his state of Alabama, there's a company, Drummond, that works in Colombia. So he's been to Colombia, knows Colombia, and called President Trump. He goes, "Hey, Colombia is a great country. Don't mess with Colombia. Colombia is great. Don't." So out of the blue, in Colombia, in the U.S., from different sides of the political spectrum, everybody said, "Hey, look, the relationship with Colombia we have to maintain." And at the end of the day, we found a solution. We said, okay, if you are unable to send the folks, our Colombian folks to Colombia without handcuffs, we'll go for them. We'll pick them up. And apparently President Trump liked that. He goes, "Oh, they're going to pay for it? We're going to save some couple of bucks on that one." So he liked the solution. We were able to say, okay, we bring our people home. I think to his credit, President Petro put an issue on the table that many, in fact, I got calls from ambassadors from other countries saying, "Hey, your president's pretty cool to stand up and for the dignity of Latins and immigrants," because not only Colombians were involved in this. So we were able to do something that was in accordance with our duty and President Petro's duty to stand up for our citizens, and we were cooperating with the U.S. with the Trump administration's decision to deport those that have broken the law and they should come back to Colombia. So that's, I think, is a great example of how diplomacy worked, how we were able to find a win-win situation, and how that relationship, that partnership between our two countries has been over the years, and I just use it as a specific example, but allowed us to establish and to continue to establish what I think are many areas in which we should continue to work. We've identified 3 major areas that I very briefly want to mention. One has to do with this issue of migration. Okay, it's, I would say, the #1 issue on which the Trump campaign was elected, and we all know about how important the issue is, and in which Colombia is part of the solution and not part of the problem. In the last years, we have taken in something like 2.8 million, almost 3 million Venezuelan migrants that have fled Venezuela and have sought refuge in Colombia. And we have taken them in. We've done it because we have a historic debt with the Venezuelan people. For many years, it was the other way around. When we had problems in Colombia, the Colombians would go to Venezuela. Now it's our duty as our brother country, that our founding father, George Washington, is a guy named Simón Bolívar, who was born in Caracas. So we have a long history with Venezuela. We owe it to them, and we do it out of our duty, but also because we understand, and this is maybe a difference with other countries, that immigration is a good thing. And that these Venezuelans, at first there's a cost, no doubt. Social services, schools, hospitals are overwhelmed 1.2% of our GNP has gone to attending the Venezuelan migrants. But today, the vast majority of them are hardworking, tax-paying citizens, good doctors, good workers. So we're happy to have done this. But from the U.S. point of view, 3 million Venezuelans that did not seek to come to the United States. No country in Latin America has done more to prevent more migrants coming to the U.S. We were able to work with Panama to reduce the Darien Gap and the flow of migrants last year in 40%. So Colombia, on the migration issue, is, I repeat, part of the solution and not part of the problem. We will continue to work with the Trump administration to see how we can continue to bring our folks home. And these programs are going. Every flights are coming in. Our aircraft, our Air Force is flying practically every other day. Flights bringing our people home. We will continue to do that. And we will continue to seek with other countries how we can deal with this issue of illegal migration or irregular migration. Other issue, drugs. We've tried over the years to surpass the idea that Colombia is only drugs. I think we have in many ways diversified our agenda, but drugs continue to be, drugs and security, a major issue to deal with. We continue to work with the U.S. and over the years, we've come to understand jointly how the drug policies of the past, there were things that worked and many that did not work. We've been able to evolve over the years. And this is nothing new. In fact, it was at the end of the Trump administration, there was a bipartisan report produced in Congress by Congress and headed by some congressmen that basically said, hey, we have to review a lot of the things that were done in the past. And over these last few years, we've been able to understand that many of the things in the past we have to review. For example, in the past, the drug question was centered solely on the growers of coca in Colombia, peasants, farmers that grow coca. The coca, as you know, is the basis for the cocaine. So for many years, the idea was eradicate. So we would have planes with the glyphosate, with this poison would come in, and we eradicate 50,000, 70,000, 80,000 hectares have been eradicated. And what happened? The next year, the crops would simply go back up. They would move from Caquetá to Putumayo. There was no sustainable future. And not only did it not work in ending the coca fields, it turned the peasants against the Colombian state. So that was definitely a bad idea. And we've come to understand that even if you eradicate all the coca, the center of the business is in the drug trafficking. The coca growers are not drug traffickers. So going after the coca growers and not after the traffickers, but not only did not work, but it did not affect the business as such. So the emphasis in these last years has been to go after the drug traffickers, the organizations, the cocaine that leaves the Colombia and goes to the United States. And last year, the Colombian police and the Army and the Air Force seized 884 tons of cocaine, record of all time, 100 more than the year before. And this year, you can bet on it, we're going to break this year's record. So we're going after the drug traffickers, the cocaine, the precursors that allow the coca to become cocaine, the money laundering, and those that affect the business more than the coca growers themselves. So that holistic approach that has been certified in the last certification that was done by the Biden administration not only recognized that we have done all this, but that how we have to look at the broader picture. But the question of drugs also is linked to a bigger question of security, of regional security, that has to do with what we talked about at the very beginning, Plan Colombia, and all these things that happened in the past. Over the years, Colombia has become a partner of the United States as a strategic ally in security issues. We have our national police trains police from Central America, Mexico, Panama, Ecuador. We today are, for example, you've heard of Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua was declared a terrorist organization that yesterday was news about them sending people to El Salvador, etc. The first time anybody even heard of Tren de Aragua was Colombia. Bogotá police identified Tren de Aragua a couple of years ago. Actually, it was the head of the Colombian police who's now of the Bogotá police, who's now the head of the Colombian police, the first that identified the Tren de Aragua. Tren de Aragua's the main kingpins that have been captured by the Colombian police in Colombia, and those that have been captured here have been done so by intelligence provided by the Colombian police. Fentanyl, huge problem now in the United States. We don't produce fentanyl in Colombia, but those that do produce it and traffic it into the United States are parts of international, transnational organizations that deal with cartels in Colombia. And our national police, in particular, and their intelligence, has helped to dismantle those organizations, Jalisco, Nueva Generación, all these other groups in Mexico. So Colombia is an ally of the United States in its security question as well. And that's why we are convinced that we need to work together stronger on this issue. Third aspect, trade. Colombia and the U.S. have a long history of unlike other countries of Latin America, Colombia, the U.S. is still our #1 trading ally, our trading partner. Now China has taken over in many of the other countries as far as major trading partner. And the trade agreement, we could debate all the good, bad, the elements of the agreement. The fact is that today we have been able to understand how trade, with President Petro, we talk a lot about this, how trade should continue, but it should expand its benefits to those areas of Colombia that have been historically abandoned by our Colombian state. So the trade as a motor for development, a trade so that we, for example, in Colombia, we need to do energy transition. Who has the technology? Who has the money? It's American private sectors that we need them to come to Colombia to build our railroads and to help us build our infrastructure. So we want to promote trade, and we want, but inclusive trade that brings these benefits to those folks that have been historically excluded from its benefits. And
you asked that I interrupt.
oh, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I needed that because I can go on forever. So as just 3 example areas. This is another example that I always use, which I really think is a beautiful example of how even on issues that apparently there's no possibility of any work, we've been able to, at least for now, we'll see how it works, identify some common ground. Recently, our environmental minister was here, our ex-environmental minister. She just resigned. Susana Mohammed, an excellent woman, environmentalist, activist, who led the COP16, just a brilliant woman. And there was a possibility to meet with a man who has been named by President Trump as his advisor for environmental issues, Mr. Ed Russo. And I was like, God, should I put this meeting together? I don't know if this is going to work or not. What the hell, let's do it. And the meeting began, and Mr. Russo, the good Trump, his best buddy of Trump, he said, no, President Trump, he's very much involved in environment because in all of his golf courses, he has clean water. That's what his argument was. And he went on to say, no, the way drill, baby, drill, the Paris Accord is horrible. It just went on. I was looking at our minister, so I hope she just took it in, took a deep breath, did not start arguing with him. And at one point, he said, we want to work for clean water. And Susana said, I agree. We want to work with clean water. We need to your technology and your know-how for specific areas. And we have now a working group. We're going to talk about Paris, and we're not going to convince anybody about the climate change. No. Clean water, concrete, specific areas in Cucuta, So even on issues that apparently there's no possibility of working together, my job, our job, is to try to establish those specific areas where we feel that even with the differences that we may have with the current administration, the national interest in Colombia, we do this because we need it in Colombia, can find coincidences, areas that we can work together. So I think this is an exciting time, challenging time, no doubt. Many things, uncertainties going on in this country, what's going to happen with the world and the tariffs and all these that we all know, Ukraine and everything's going on that you all know about. But how, for Colombia, it is important, first of all, to continue with this relationship, which is what makes this meeting today with you so important. is that, yes, I focus on Trump and what he's going to say, what he's not going to say, what they're going to say in Congress, what the decertification is and this and that. But at the end of the day, the relationship between our two countries are about our peoples, about the people of Colombia and the people of the United States. And that's the strongest element we have. We have almost 3 million Colombians that live in this country. We have, in fact, for the first time, 2 senators that are of Colombian origin. Bernie Moreno from Ohio was born in Colombia, and Rubén Gallego from Arizona, a Republican and a Democrat. His mother is a Colombian, which is an example of how Colombians in this country are part of the creation of this American society, and how Colombians are part of this. And most Colombians have a cousin or a friend or somebody that lives in this country. Colombians love the U.S. Colombia's dream is to come to the Disney World and to send their kids here and study English. We love your movies and your music. And the other way around is true as well. And I have not met a single American who has gone to Colombia that did not come back in love with Colombia. We had 1.4 million tourists from the U.S. come to Colombia last year, record of all time. U.S. investment in Colombia last year was the highest ever. American companies have understood that dealing with Colombia is good for their business. And so the private sector, the universities, the way in which our peoples go back and forth, that is what allows me to think that this partnership between our two countries not only should continue, but should further. So I think, again, thank you so much. I think we're at a very interesting moment, challenging, but at the same time, I think this is a opportunity. And thank you for being here, to listening to me, because I think our best ambassadors are those that can help send this message to others. Those of you who have been in Colombia, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you that have not, we're going to do something about it. You got to go visit Colombia. And I'm sure that, I hope you prove me wrong, but I'm sure that once you're there, you will fall in love with Colombia like many others have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was wonderful. You covered a lot of ground, but I'm going to ask you to put on your historian hat on. And you started your conversation by describing the phases through which the U.S. Colombia relationship has gone through in this century. Plan Colombia, Peace Colombia, and then like an add-on to Peace Colombia, climate change. If you were to go to the future, how would you characterize this phase of the U.S. Colombia relationship as a historian?
Actually, the journalist, I see there's a journalist back there that quoted me the other day saying that I'm a historian, not a futurologist. So you're asking me to put on my futurologist hat. No, but I think it's a great question, because I think it's how all of that past, of how those, because I mentioned issues, you know, the drugs, this and that. Through all that process, has created trust between the two countries, institutional trust. We had a meeting the other day with the new acting director of the DEA, which is this very interesting person. He had been in Colombia before, and he said this. He said, "The Colombian National Police is the gold standard of police in the world," he said. And that is because he's worked with the Colombian police over the years, regardless of whether the president in Colombia was this or that. So I think there's so many things that, you know, and you're finding that in the different institutions. And I think that this moment, because of the particularities of having the first leftist president in Colombia, President Petro, and a president like Trump that, without a doubt, is on the other extreme of the political ideology, is really a test that we've never had before. Yeah, there were differences between, I don't know, Uribe, Obama, I guess, where you were, where there were differences there, and there were differences, but never as stark as they are today. So I hope that in the future, they will look back and say, oh, wow, Colombia's relationship, despite the fact that we had this guy on the extreme left, extreme right, or whatever you want to call it, we're able to find that common ground and build, and how that the relationship was able to continue on both sides. And I think that's something that we sometimes don't cherish. In Colombia, I mentioned on the 26th of January how everyone came together. That was not the case in the past. With Plan Colombia, and I admit I was part of the those on the left that were saying, abajo Plan Colombia, abajo TLC, you know, we were against it. The U.S. relationship was an issue of disputes between left and right. Today, to have a leftist president saying we need the United States, nobody's against the U.S. today. Nobody's questioning the U.S. relationship. There's a national consensus that we need to work with the United States. Obviously, there are going to be differences. Obviously, there are those folks in Colombia that would prefer Trump or prefer the other. But the value of the relationship with the United States is something that we have gained as a country. And I hope that this is also true in the United States as well, that despite the differences that there are, despite that some folks don't like our president, like him more or whatever, there's a value, they cherish the Colombian relationship. So I hope that this period will not only show that that is the case, but in many ways strengthen that partnership.
More question from me, and then we'll open it to the audience. There is one issue that intersects many of the topics that the agenda with the U.S., Colombia shares with the U.S., and that is Venezuela. Migrants, drugs, and security are all related to the situation in Venezuela. What role is Colombia, through its embassy here, playing in the conversations that the U.S. is having with Venezuela? Do you think there might be a negotiated option at the end of the conversations that are taking place right now?
Great question. I think that's, I'll do it in parts. When I first arrived, the issue of Venezuela was a little different from what it is today. But from the very beginning, actually, that meeting between President Biden and President Petro back in April of 2023, we began to work together very closely with the U.S. We can someday sit down and see if that was a good idea or a bad idea, if it worked or didn't work. But the fact is, there was a roadmap that led to the Barbados agreements, that led to the idea that there would be the kind of a process by which there would be elections and sanctions and this and that. So that was all designed jointly, let's say. That was not something that we thought of on our own. And we always worked and we always thanked the U.S. for the support that we received. Not only us, and then that's important. There's also, Norway played a big role, other countries. With the elections of last year, there was a moment of crisis, obviously. We worked very closely with Brazil and maintained the position that we did not and have not and will not recognize the election of Nicolás Maduro, something that people don't understand. But in Venezuela, in Miraflores, they're furious. What do you mean you don't recognize us? How come Petro didn't come to our inauguration? But we, as Democrats, in the big sense of the word, believe in democracy and human rights, cannot accept an election that, from all points of view, did not even meet the basic standards of the Venezuelan constitution. But at the same time, we also recognize that Venezuela, first of all, it's easy to criticize Venezuela if you are Chile, 40, I don't know how many kilometers away it is, or other countries. We have a border, a live human border. Something like 7 million people live, or it depends on how you measure it, but on both sides of the border. If you go to Cucuta, one of my interns here from Cucuta, the Cucuta is a binational area where people for years go buy their gasoline in Venezuela, and the Venezuelans would come buy their shoes and their clothes in Colombia. So we have a reality there of this vibrant border area. The country tried back in the Duque years the idea of cutting off or closing the border, which we never closed the border. The border was legally closed, but basically we ended up turning it over to the illegal organizations. So people, instead of going over the bridge legally, they would go under the bridge illegally. We closed the consulates, we closed the embassies, we bet on Guaido taking over. That did not work. So we clearly understand we need to recognize the fact that even though we don't like Maduro, we don't recognize his election, we need to work with him. And work with him to deal with the border, to deal with basic issues that have to do with the millions of Colombians that still live over there and the millions of Venezuelans that are in Colombia. So we have maintained, sometimes they don't understand it, but we maintain relations with the government and the state of Venezuela but we have these tensions with the Maduro government, and President Petro and President Lula, both of them together, proposed during this whole period different options of a negotiation, and we continue to insist that the solution has to be done between Venezuelans. It has been our role, my role as ambassador, I inherited this from my predecessor, Luis Alberto Murillo, to deal with the Venezuelan opposition. I spoke several times with Maria Corina Machado and the opposition, in which our proposal was that the government and the opposition sit down and figure out how they do a transition towards democracy. We continued. In fact, every time I spoke to Maria Corina, she said, "Thank you, President Petro, for helping us to try to seek some kind of a solution." He goes, "If she said to me once, the only one that can convince Maduro to do anything is President Petro." And I called Petro and I said, "This is what she goes, you said that? Well, I wish that was true." The fact is he didn't answer my calls, and the fact is that did not work. Okay, but to be very honest, that Maduro basically closed all contact with President Petro, and so that became that did not go anywhere. But now your question is a very valid question. I think nobody really knows what's going on. We've seen mixed messages. President Trump has designated Rick Grenell as a special envoy. He's been in Venezuela. He's reached some preliminary agreements in which apparently, and I don't want to say something that is not true because this is very delicate issues, but what we are seeing that there is the emphasis now is on the immigration issue and on the deportations. And the message that is that other issues like democracy, human rights have gone to a second level, and that basically if President Maduro is willing to take back the Venezuelan migrants, the other issues will be put off. That remains to be seen because, you know, that Marco Rubio and the Secretary of State has a very clear position on this. We've seen the measures dealing with Chevron. So there are those in Washington that are saying, no, we got to tighten Maduro more. There are those who are saying, no, we have to deal with Maduro pragmatically. And to be honest, I don't know what's going to happen, but the role of Colombia today is sort of like on hold. To be honest, our message has been, if you need us, we're there to help. We have, and that's, I think, was one of the few countries in the world that still maintains diplomatic relations with Venezuela, that we have an ambassador in Venezuela, a great guy, Milton Rengifo, who's there and who meets with them and talks with them about these specific issues. But we also have great relationships with the opposition that we continue to maintain. So the day that Colombia or Brazil or others are needed to help a national dialogue, we're there to help. But so far, to be honest, we have not been called. And it has been Mr. Grenell directly with Maduro that has been dealing on these issues that I think remains to be seen what's going to happen.
Wonderful. I'll open it up to questions. I just ask you to introduce yourself and let the ambassador know what you're studying, what year you're in. So please raise your hand. There's a question back there.
Hi, Ambassador Garcia-Peña. My name is...
Is it on, the microphone? Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hello.
Perfect.
Can you hear me? Okay. My name is Catalina Jaramillo. I'm a senior in the SFS, an undergraduate student studying international politics. My question to you has to do with U.S. aid. We know that Colombia has been the U.S.'s largest recipient in South America of aid for a long time, largely via U.S. aid. This aid has been a centerpiece of the bilateral relationship and key to the approaches on many of the issues that you highlight, including regional security, the environment, coca replacement programs, migration through humanitarian assistance to Venezuelan immigrants, implementation of the peace accords, and the list goes on. So how is the embassy navigating the dismantling of U.S. aid, and what comes next?
Great question. Yes, you know, the 90-day freeze on is worldwide, but obviously you are absolutely right. If there's any country that is more affected in the region, maybe in Africa, Asia, others could also be affected, but Colombia, without a doubt, in the region, is the most affected. The list you gave is absolutely right on. All of them are vital for us, to be honest. What did I do? Or what did we do? The embassy and those in Bogota, we put together, because the decree, the decree was, yeah, what do you call the executive order, exactly. 90-day hold, and basically they ask us a question. How is this we are doing in the U.S., making the U.S. stronger, safer, and more prosperous? So what did we do? We answered to show it, and I'm convinced that everything that on that list is making, it's good for us. We need to do it. We need the peace process. We need all those things we need. But all that is making the U.S. stronger, safer, and more prosperous. We went by parts. There's 82 projects in Colombia. Today we're talking about $1.6 billion that are frozen. There's 400 in the pipeline, about $2 billion that are frozen as of we speak, as of today. Things that cover all of these areas. But we have argued, for example, the issue of migration. You're right, the Venezuelans that we've taken in. These centers called Integrate, where the Venezuelans are able to integrate into Colombian society. That helps the U.S. where they don't come here. The peace process. I know they don't like to talk about peace, but if we talk about the peace process in Colombia, state president or the rule of law in territorial Colombia is also in the benefit of the United States, because it takes away the basis of the illegal groups that are part of this fuel of this organizations, and also is a way of deterring immigration. And we went one by one of the big packages of the implementation of the peace accord, the programs that have to do with there's I would say the biggest chunk has to do with migration, and we did, and it was like a week after he said this, we have sent this to Secretary Rubio. But to be honest, we have to wait and see, and the signs that we have thus far, and that is not, I'm not saying anything secret here, or not. I mean, there's public knowledge. I mean, USAID as we know it is probably a thing of the past. How they will do this legally, I'm not sure. The message that we have received is that there was something that was going to be morphed into something new within the State Department. I don't know how this movie is going to finally work out, but there are things that we've already been told, and I think it's a tragedy. It's horrible, and from many points of view, is absolutely unacceptable. But anything that has to do with racial equality, equity, women's rights, LGBT, I mean, we're going to fight for it. We're going to continue insisting. But if you're asking me to bet on it, probably they're not going to happen. Already President Trump listed a few of the cases. In fact, in the State of the Union, he said there was this ridiculous program to help indigenous and Afro-Colombians in Central America. I was like, oh, okay, if you want to do away with that, because I don't think there are any Afro-Colombians in Central America, whatever. But the fact is, I think that we have to be very, very, very honest that there are areas where the agenda of this administration will probably not survive. What will happen to the programs with the migrants? What will happen to those programs that have to do with, for example, crop substitution? And we would hope that those more rational minds will say, hey, this also helps the United States. But that remains to be seen. At this moment, everything is frozen. There's exceptions, though. That's interesting, though, in this program. Everything that have to do with counter-narcotics, because this was the executive order. It depends on how they interpret it on the ground. And so, for example, at one moment, the helicopters that are used for the anti-narcotics, they stopped. They go, no, we can't do anything. And they immediately called, no. Counter-narcotics is okay, and the helicopters went back to operate a few days later. So there are areas like counter-narcotics that was not affected because that's not IAID. But people took it in a more general term, because actually in another decree they talked about foreign assistance. So people didn't know exactly what was included and what not included. But in all USAID programs today are halted. Several of the offices in Bogota that deal with racial equality, inclusion, these kinds of things have been closed down, and the likelihood of them being opened again are very, very scarce. So we're in a wait and see mode, like I think the entire world was going to happen. But you're absolutely right. That's something we are working on in Colombia. What are we going to do with these programs? How are we going to continue? Because those are commitments we have as a country. The implementation of the peace accord. For example, now these programs that we're doing in Catatumbo that we in the old days would have sought money from the USAID, we're doing it all with Colombian money. It's all Colombian budget that was going to do these things. To what degree we're able to cover all the costs of what we're going to do, but that remains to be seen. We're in a difficult situation right now, fiscally in Colombia, but the political decision on President Petro is we're not going to sit around and wait and see what's going to happen. We continue to, on those key areas, for example, crop substitution and the voluntary, the program Catatumbo, we have our own money to do it. So that doesn't mean we're not concerned. We are, and we hope that there are those folks in Congress that are helping also to defend the programs of USAID, regardless of under what name or how they're going to call it. They already took down the sign of USAID, so it's not going to be called that anymore, that's for sure.
Okay. Right here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Emma Giraldo, and I'm an intern on the commercial office in the Ministry of Commerce, Industry, and Tourism. And my question is, how do you foresee the future evolution of China's and the U.S. influence in Latin America in terms of investment?
Great question. That's a great question. The issue of China is one of those issues that, again, it looms very large in this administration. You know, the Colombia, as I said, I think I mentioned in my opening remarks, the U.S. continues to be our #1 trading partner. Chinese investment in Colombia has increased, and there are specific areas where, in fact, I received the other day a question from a Congress of the member of a senator from the Republican Party said, "Hey, somebody gave him a note that how come the Chinese are building the metro in Bogota?" And I said, well, for one simple reason, because there was no U.S. company that came up to present itself. So my argument is that we would like more U.S. investment, but Colombia is a sovereign country. We need to diversify our economic relations. Another example are meat producers would love to sell meat to the United States, but the U.S. has not opened its market. The Chinese are buying our meat, and we'll sell our meat to the Chinese. So I think that's part of how as a country we're dealing with this. But at the same time, understand that in many ways China is important as a market for many of the things that we need. But to think that China could someday replace the United States as our trading partner is simply not real. Concrete example, you know, our #1 export to the U.S. today is not coffee, it's flowers. The 80% of the flowers that you guys maybe gave to your girlfriends or boyfriends on Valentine's Day came from Colombia. And that is the result of a market that was developed over the years, back in the 1990s with the ATPA, a long time ago, in which Colombian growers were able to identify what the tastes of the American people are for Valentine's Day. Now we have Mother's Day coming up. So there's a market that we have developed exclusively, not exclusively, we sell flowers for the rest of the world as well. But without a doubt, by far, it is a U.S. market. And the people of the flower companies are able to tell what Americans like their flowers cut this way and that way. It's for the U.S. market, for specific U.S. moments, in which, in fact, it's a beautiful example. I think it's a success story, because in Colombia, the vast majority of those flowers are grown by women in the rural areas that bring rural development to their families. So it's a benefit for Colombia. This is not a big company, yeah, there are companies that are involved in this, but it's the rural women in Colombia and their families are the ones that are benefited by this. And in the U.S., there's something like 250,000 jobs that are produced by those flowers that are given out to the U.S. So here's an example of how this relationship has been developed, and that when this happened on the 26th of January, everybody in the flower business was freaking out. Oh my God, Valentine's coming up. What's going to happen, right? And so, in fact, I like him very much. He's a good friend of mine. the commerce minister went to the flower people and said, "Oh, don't worry about it. We'll sell it to the Chinese." He goes, "No, you got crazy? What are you going to send all these flowers to China? They're not going to be able to buy our flowers." So, we actually we did a little gesture on Valentine's Day. The embassy we gave out flowers to all the congressmen. We sent a bouquet of Colombian flowers to each of the 435 members of the House and 100 senators, in which we say, "The country of beauty. This is from Colombia to you." On such a beautiful day, flowers, joy, love, what that means in Colombia as a country of beauty. And so this is an example of how, China, yes, we have to deal with China. Yes, if they want to buy our beef. But the fact is that it's strategically speaking, for many reasons, we continue to see the U.S. as our prime ally. And we know that, unfortunately, this is not Colombia speaking. I think the rest of the world is also saying, I heard this woman from the European Union said it very clearly. If the U.S., she said, if America first means America alone, we'll turn elsewhere. And I think everybody's looking at it. I think the Chinese are happy. Okay, if the U.S. wants to close its doors with the rest of the world, we're here. So that's part of reality. And President Petro has been very clear. We have to diversify, not only with China, with the Middle East, with Africa, with elsewhere. So I think part of this realignment of the world that is taking place, or that could begin to be taking place, will probably lead Colombia and many other countries of the world to look to China more than they did in the past, but not because of a decision that we would rather not do or not do. In fact, President Petro said to me something that I didn't know when it was the first conversation. The Chinese, they offer a lot of stuff. They're building this port in Peru. I had no idea. I heard about it the first time President Petro told me, this port in Peru, they promised pie in the sky. First thing they brought Chinese workers, didn't hire any Peruvians. Environmental disaster. They were saying they're going to complete it in, 2 or 3 years. It's been, I don't know how many years. The Chinese are not good partners. We don't want to, we would rather not deal with them. That was President Petro talking to me. So I think that's part of the reality. We have to also understand and without a doubt, the U.S. has things that we need that the Chinese don't have. So, for example, this infrastructure that we're talking about, electric vehicles, many things that we would prefer that the U.S. continue to be our partner. But yes, the issue of China is going to be there, and it's going to be, I think, for the rest of the world, continue to be an issue to deal with.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. Is there anyone else that has a question? Yeah. Thank you.
Hello, Ambassador. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. My name is Jackson. I'm a first year in the SFS here studying international political economy. I was really wondering, you brought up multiple times how important it is to keep up these relationships with people such as like Tommy Tuberville, or giving the flowers to every congressperson. How much would you say that those personal relationships matter versus what common interests the U.S. and Colombia might have?
It's huge. It's really amazing. And the example of Senator Tuberville is really fabulous because the first time I met with him, I came in and we were waiting in the room, and the staffer came in and says, "The coach will be here in a minute." And I said, "What coach?" And so when he came in, I said, "Excuse me, yes, I'm the ambassador." Said, "I don't know how to call you. Should I call you coach or should I call you senator?" And he said, "Coach." And 80% of the talk was about football. I was raised in the U.S. My dad was a diplomat, so I spent many years here in the U.S. I'm a New Orleans Saints fan, for your information. So we talked about the Saints. He was a Cowboy fan. That weekend, the Saints beat the Cowboys, so I was really happy. That was a conversation, and in fact, with him, the staff said, "Hey, we got to talk about Colombia. We're not here to talk about the NFL." But those kinds of we in fact, he went to Colombia, and we went with him to Colombia. He hit it off with our foreign minister, with Gilberto Murillo. They became really good friends. So those kinds of personal contacts are fundamental, because at the end of the day, and that's why I say that when, you know, when we get people to go to Colombia and to meet others and to see what it's really like, you know, I can give my talks and I try to speak as well as I can, but there's those concrete people-to-people contacts that really have been built over the years, and it's interesting because not only the example of Coach Tuberville, as I call him now, but how in over the years how the different moments that we talked about, Plan Colombia and so forth, have led others to understand Colombia in different lights. There are those you can talk with the folks in the State Department. You can tell those that were there in the Santos years, because they're the ones that are in love of our peace process. You can tell those that were there before because they're still talking about the security questions. So the personal engagement is also linked to, let's say, broader political and other kinds of issues that have to do with that relationship. But yes, it's huge, and how people hit it off, and how people understand it, how people understand when you're being sincere. I think part of it is the trust, you know, when you can say, hey, look, we can agree on this, but let's not talk about that, we're not going to agree. That's part of also trust building.
Wonderful. Any other questions from the audience? I think these are our last questions.
Ambassador, thank you very much. I'm Gabriel Angarita. I'm doing a master's degree in policy management right now at McCourt. And I want to ask you about a little bit about the crisis that we have this late January. Something that really struck me was like that even though we have built a lot of bridges, diplomatic bridges between the United States and Colombia, overnight, via tweet, we can throw that away. And now the incumbents are doing politics and policy through social media. How is your work affected by this? How do you mold yourself and react to this new way of do politics?
Great question. You know that you have to know what you can do, things that you can change and things that you cannot change. But there's one thing that we will not change. Petro and Trump love the social media, and they're going to continue doing it regardless. I always say to everybody, no, please don't. Next day, he says so. So I should become part of the what do they call the course, part of part of the game that we have to deal with today. But I think we have to understand that there are different levels of politics in this world today, where President Trump and President Petro both are doing on social media what they were elected to do, what they believe they're doing, they're speaking to their bases. That's part of reality. I mean, if somebody said, why don't you take away the Twitter from President Petro? No, that's going to happen. They're going to go back and forth. But to understand how the dimensions of how that affects the reality on the ground and what we're doing, that's the magic of how we're able to that day, or that there was or I guess it was a couple of days later. I don't remember the day there was. President Petro gave an interview on Univision, and we were privy to it. It was going to come out at 5 o'clock, and in the interview, he said that President Trump was a fascist. Oh my God! Did he say? Yes, he said he was a fascist. So they called him. Oh my God! So I called Mauricio Claver. I said, Mauricio, I want to let heads up on this. Today at 5 is going to come out, and President Petro said that Trump is a fascist. And Mauricio answered this. He goes, don't worry about it. President Trump does not look at Univision. Maybe he looks at Fox News. He doesn't look at that. And I thought about that, and no pasó nada. Nothing happened. He said it, and back and forth. So sometimes we sit down and we look at the Twitter. Oh my God, Petro said this, or oh my God, Trump said this. But you have to understand that that's part of a whole different. That doesn't mean that tomorrow it may not affect. Yes, and obviously the decision on the Twitter because it wasn't so much the Twitter. It was a decision to turn back the flights. That was action. So actions do speak louder than words, and that's where we have to be careful of what we do and what we don't do. But I think that sometimes that doesn't mean we should ignore what happens in the social media, or should we ignore the declarations of the presidents back and forth. But I think we also have to sort of sit down and say, okay, that's part of how this new reality is working, of how announcements are made back and forth. But you're right, it's not easy, and sometimes we wish that our presidents would be a little bit less active on the social media. But I've also come to understand that's also part of reality. And in fact, that example in which President Petro put down on the let's say on the bigger picture of the political agenda, the issue of dignity of the migrants, that was a good thing. I'm proud of my president. I'm proud of him for having said, hey, treat our people well. They are not criminals. He's right. And that has to be done on social media. If he does it in secret, that would not. So I think social media play a role. And I think it's a good thing that these political debates happen. And as I said, several ambassadors say, hey, your president's pretty ballsy to get up there and stand up to Trump. And it was a good thing. So at the end of the day, I suffered that day. That day was terrible. We had got an ulcer and everything, whatever you want. But at the end of the day, that's part of the political debate of this world in which we live in. And so I have come to understand that I should not really get upset about these Twitters, although we have somebody in the embassy that's every morning checking out the Twitter, what's going on, what they're saying back and forth. But don't ignore it, but don't magnify it, and don't come. And I've come to learn not to allow that to become, breaking news, headline news, and everything you talk about is what happens on. No, at the end of the day, because tomorrow he'll do another Twitter, and somebody will talk about something else, and so that's the other thing of social media, that it's all so quick. It goes back and forth. When those issues become decisions and realities, that's when you have to worry about it. But I think that's part of the way this new moment of politics are. I taught the U.S. foreign policy, and I'm sort of about the old school that I used to like, the diplomatic religion. But today we have to rethink this, and that social media is part of reality of how both presidents, and I think that both are legitimately using those mechanisms to do what they were elected to do. So President Petro is simply doing on Twitter or on X, I guess it is now, nothing different than what he believes and what his agenda is and what his political agenda is. And it's the same for President Trump. So they're both en sus juegos, as we say in Colombia.
I know we're out of time, but I want to push back a bit on your answer, because although you think that might not have consequences, Colombia was viewed as having a surplus with the US and not being in risk to receive tariffs. But suddenly you saw what played out between President Trump and President Petro on social media. And if I'm a US investor and I'm thinking of investing in Colombia and I saw that play out, I'm like, I'll think twice before making a commitment, because there is some uncertainty now related to how President Trump is going to relate to Colombia, when before you had thought, no, they have a surplus with us, President Trump is not going to mess with a trade agreement. So I think tweets have consequences, unfortunately. So I just wanted to push back on that, because I think I don't think it's a game. There's people's lives, there's visas being revoked, there's people that had to go back to Colombia temporarily, but it has consequences. So I don't know if you want to answer that.
Well taken. But at the same time, there's people's lives that are being affected by the fact that they're treated in dignified way to come back. So I think that both are true. But also it's an indicator of how I think it remains to be seen. So far, I think that there are doubts, not so much about what happened. That yes, there were doubts at that moment. Today, there are investors are questioning investing in the rest of the world of what's happening all over the world right now. And so there's reciprocal visa, tariffs, etc. So there is uncertainty that could affect investment in Colombia and in the rest of the world. But your point is taken, and obviously, and I think that was part of the lessons learned as well. We understand that this is the consequences, because yes, we in theory say we are both sovereign nations, but when you are this small and the other guy is this big, and the other guy's a huge bully that's willing to kick, I mean, not only us, look how he's treating Canada, look how he's treating Europe, look how he's treating the rest of the world. We also have to be very responsible with our people and responsible with our country. And I think that President Petro understands that, and which is why I don't think it'll happen again.
For this conversation. It has been great to hear from you. You have been very open and candid, and it's very welcome that you have really shared your perspective with Georgetown University. So thank you again for being
A great
here.
pleasure to be here. Thank you.